I was really, this is an amazing conference, isn't it? I've learned stuff and really enjoyed the presentations yesterday. So hopefully it'll be just as good today, but that's kind of, we'll see how it goes here. I want to endorse Tom's talk about the deafblind projects. I'm the PI in the deafblind project in Michigan, and they're incredibly important. If you're not at least register with the deafblind project, you're making a huge mistake. And you say, well, my kid's not deafblind. Register anyway, because your kid may actually be deafblind, even though you haven't thought about that. Also, I've been asked, it's my pleasure to bring greetings from the Charge Syndrome Foundation. David Wolf, our president, was unable to come. He had planned to come, but was unable to be here after all. The foundation is here for you. It does incredible work. Donna mentioned, I think yesterday, that she's with the Scientific Advisory Board. I'm the chair of the Clinical Research Advisory Board. Her group does like the mouse model stuff, and our group does stuff like sleep, the things that are more clinically focused. So your membership dollars do help in terms of the kind of work, kind of information that we all need and all want, as well as providing the conferences, as well as providing Charge accounts, and lots of advocacy on behalf of Charge syndrome. So if you're not a member, it's $30 isn't a bad deal. Consider joining that. But anyway, greetings from David and from the Charge Foundation board. Dan, I think, said yesterday that it's really difficult have a kid with severe behavior problems to come here and cure them in a week. It's even harder in 1 hour. So I'll talk about my thoughts on behavior, but it's unlikely, well, I don't know, maybe it's possible, that I'll turn on some light bulbs and say, oh, now I know what to do with my kid. So I just want to lower your expectations, because everybody wants to come to presentations on behavior, and everybody's always disappointed by presentations on behavior because they never give you the actual answer to what to do with your child. I want to also point out on our template here, the Charge Syndrome Research Lab, and I'll show you a picture at the end of some of the students who are members of that, although you've seen some of them right here with us. We felt like we needed to have something to represent the lab, like a logo. And so 2 years ago, Shanti and Megan Schmidl, who's now the new Pam Ryan at Perkins, she's taken Pam's position, and my wife and I were in Germany for the German conference and went to Heidelberg afterwards and stayed with a family. And it turned out that Lavinia, who's got Charge, loves to sketch. I said, Lavinia, please, would you draw something to be the logo for our lab? So that sketch is what she drew, and here's a picture of two of my students with Lavinia this past summer wearing our Charge Lab t-shirts, showing her that her work is being put to good use. All right, that's weird, must be autistic. So that's my son Jacob, and Jacob, not everybody paints themselves with finger paints, although I wouldn't be surprised if, you don't have to admit it now, or it may be a secret that you go home later and get your finger paints out and paint yourselves. There's a lot of weird behavior in all of us, right? I think some of my students think this is probably genetic because I'm kind of weird, and so Jacob's weird, and so it's. But if you have a genetic syndrome, then that weirdness becomes something completely different. It's one thing to be a relatively normal person and be weird sometimes. Think of everybody you know. Do you know anybody who isn't kind of weird? No, you don't. But they don't all have genetic syndromes. So as soon as they say, oh yeah, but that person's got that syndrome. Oh, now I understand their behavior. It's kind of like autism, right? How often do you get that one? My kid has Charge syndrome. Oh, that's like autism, right? Oh my gosh, no, it's not like autism. It's completely different from autism. And, some days you think just having a kid with autism would be kind of cool, right? Now, Jacob isn't necessarily the most social person in the world. So his weirdness extends to other kinds of areas. But, how many kids, Yeah, there he is, showing some affection for Gretchen. Gretchen actually became a student in my research lab as an undergraduate, and then decided she wanted to work with Jacob, so she became one of his caregivers. And now she's going to be my future daughter-in-law. So I tell my son, I knew her first. There seems to be a presumption that if behavior is weird, it must be part of a diagnosis, especially if it comes from a syndrome. So we have to put a label on it. We got to diagnose this thing so that we can feel better about it. I mean, I know how hard it is to go out sometimes in public with your kid with charge, particularly when they're young. And it's really embarrassing to see other people get up from the table to move farther away from you. And, and my kid then would do some really disgusting things as well. But then I've also been out with my other children, and that was kind of just normal that they would act up. I remember one day at McDonald's, I was just hollering at them because they were dropping things and spilling things, and I was so upset. And I reached over and knocked over my milk. Okay, it's not just you, I'm sorry. But we feel like we have to put a diagnosis to this thing, and it can't have any meaning, right? It doesn't make any sense that the kid would want to take finger paints and paint themselves, except I think it sounds kind of fun. But no, we say, okay, this meaningless stuff is just because they have this diagnosis. That's what it's all about. And also the idea that it's not in the child's control. They couldn't stop it. Kind of something that they're compelled to do because of this additional diagnosis that they've got. They're obsessive compulsive, or they got tics, or they're autistic, of course, or they ADHD. They can't help themselves. And actually, as difficult as it can be, these things can be modified. So I really think otherwise. My fundamental belief that all behavior has a purpose comes from my philosophical and theoretical orientation, which David mentioned yesterday, is Adlerian following Alfred Adler, who was an associate of Freud and Jung, but the only one that made sense. And still makes sense, I think. But the idea that all behavior has a purpose, if you can understand what individual's purpose is in doing something, their behavior kind of makes sense. You might not think it was the best way to handle something, right? Maybe there's a better behavior which would get you what you want. Maybe that temper tantrum, isn't something we want you to do all the time, but, it's often quite effective. It's like when the behavior seems the weirdest, that's when I want to get in there and think, why would that kid be doing that? If I were in that kid's shoes, why might I choose to do that? And very often, maybe related to my own strangeness, it kind of makes some sense to me. But I think you have to take that perspective and that attitude if you ever want to make sense out of behavior and be able to know what to do about it. As long as we say it's autism, or it's ADHD, or it's that, then we don't do anything about it because it explains everything, right? Suddenly it's all explained. And also, all behavior is communication. I came upon this one many, many years ago, and I've talked about it a lot. I used to do a presentation called Behavior is Communication. And I know that it helped me, again, think about, especially in terms of the relationship with the individual who's communicating, that behavior is not just meaningless. Behavior can tell me something. One of Jacob's former caregivers talked about going into his house and going into Jacob's world, where she tries to understand what Jacob's behavior is saying to her so they can have a relationship. And she says, sometimes it's not always clear, but Jacob keeps at it until I get it. Not all behavior is intentional communication, however. Sometimes their behavior tells us what's going on with them. Jacob, for a long time, would stick objects in his neck and wrench his neck against them. That meant ear infection. It took us a while to figure that out, but enough trips to the pediatrician and the Ready Care showed us that, in fact, he could diagnose it a day before the ENT could diagnose it, or the pediatrician could not diagnose it, because we take him in, don't see anything, we go back the next day, oh yeah, it's really, really red. He knew. But he wasn't doing it to tell us, he was doing it in response to, this kind of helps with masking some of that pain or give me a different pain. So there was purpose to his behavior. We had to read his behavior as communication, and I think that's what's incredibly important about all the behavior. It's telling us something about what's going on inside our child, which can be very useful to us as we work on our relationship and work on helping our child to figure out what behaviors work better for attaining the goals or the purpose that they have for their behavior. Walking the floor with Jacob. We actually moved from Wichita, Kansas to Mount Pleasant, Michigan when Jacob was about 3 months, which was a little scary thing to do. So this is after he moved, and if you can see, he's got stents coming out of his nose from his choanal atresia repair. But while we were still in Wichita, we learned something terribly difficult, actually. I remember Jacob was extremely fussy one night. And so what do you do with a fussy baby? You put them over your shoulder and pat their back, you rock them, you walk around with them, and nothing was working. Nancy tried walking around with him. I tried walking around with him. My father-in-law was walking around with him. Fussy, 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 fussy. Well, I finally had him in exasperation. I said, okay. And I put him down. Immediately he settled, right? So, whoa, this isn't right. A parent's supposed to be able to comfort their child when they're upset, not just leave them alone. But Jacob is training us to just leave him alone, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but certainly happened a lot because he was so much happier when we weren't messing with him, which creates issues with attachment and bonding, right? A study I did a number of years ago on attachment and bonding issues in charge syndrome, attachment happens and bonding happens with our child when they look us in the eye, they give us that first smile, they settle. My wife, we have a granddaughter, finally, I have a grandchild. It took them so long. But they live in Boston, unfortunately. My wife's been consulting with Perkins, so she gets to go see Natalie fairly often. But Natalie was just born in January. It was pretty fussy, and my daughter-in-law was, no, I don't know what to do, first-time mother at 38, but what do I do? And Nancy said, she needs her mother, and handed her to Helen, and immediately Natalie settled, right? And Helen went, oh, right? She needs me. You see the attachment bonding things started to happen? But when your kid doesn't see, doesn't hear, doesn't want to be held, it gets in the way. So we did find it's a huge issue for charge babies. And of the 25 parents that we surveyed, about 20% reported delayed bonding they're feeling towards their child, and nearly half reported delayed attachment from their child. But calling it autism kind of helps, then, doesn't it? It's like, well, it's because they're autistic, so that gets me off the hook. I don't think that's an appropriate diagnosis. Some of you heard me say that before. But we do look for explanations as to why that might be happening. Why can't I attach to this child? So here's Jacob lying on the floor. The dog thought that was a good posture to be in as well. By the way, at 29, Jacob still does that. He likes to lie down on the ground on that particular side. He's got farmer's tan on one arm and perfectly white on the other. So why did Jacob behave that way? Well, perhaps touch was painful. Our kids are tactilely defensive. In the NICU, they told me to hold his hand. So I sat there for hours holding his hand, probably drove him nuts. But I thought I was doing the right thing. They also said, we have a music box. So I wound that music box over and over and over again, stone deaf. Right? It didn't soothe me at all either. So maybe the touch was painful. Being carried could be very confusing to his senses, right? That vestibular sense that wasn't really there. The proprioceptive, I don't know. There's all the senses, and David could do a better job than me to explain that, but I bet it was confusing to him and feeling very insecure in our arms. Lying on the floor is much more stable, and he didn't have to worry about the touch. He didn't have to worry about pain. He didn't have to worry about lots of stuff. So that was his preference. But it took us quite a while to figure that out and understand it. I mean, relatively quickly we knew that's what he liked. But to have that stop hurting, right? Hurting our feelings, because it's all about us. Why would he do that? And it's really hard not to know how to comfort your child. I have to say, when my daughter was born a couple years later and she'd get fussy, I'd just put her down. It took me a while to figure out that's not really what she wanted, but So some of the evolution of my thoughts. So Jacob did avoid social contact as an infant. Obviously, he preferred to be by himself. But a psychologist in town who was working with families of kids with severe disabilities, and he became a good friend. But he came by with this book, Deafblind Infants and Children, which is a kind of a classic in the deafblind field. And it described Jacob's behavior beautifully. He said, oh, he's not autistic, he's deafblind. That's the explanation for why he's resisting our contact, is because the deafblind is the dual sensory impairment. We didn't know about how many of the sensors were messed up at that point in time, but we knew at least 2 of them were messed up. So that was actually a great comfort, and I went happily off saying to everybody, oh no, Jacob's behavior is because he's deafblind. And I actually asked our project director, Beth Kennedy, to give me a list of typical deafblind behaviors in children. And this was her list. And I look at this stuff. I mean, you know, eye pressing, finger flicking, rocking, clinging, spinning, vocal tics, feces smearing. That was one of Jacob's favorites. Learned helplessness, submissive. All this stuff, which is weird, right? So probably autistic, or maybe just deafblind. You know, why would kids who are deafblind necessarily develop some of these behaviors? Because they don't all do it, nor does every child with charge develop challenging behaviors. But there's something about the sensory impairments which may be a major part of this. But I got a little bit of pushback. People were saying, well, my child's not deafblind, but still has these behaviors. So explain that, Tim. It took me a while. But the idea of multisensory impairments that David mentioned and Tom mentioned this morning is like, yeah. I mean, it's not just the hearing and the vision. You know, the sense of smell, which influences the taste. I already knew about the touch stuff. The vestibular problems, the proprioceptive problems. I mean, you start adding these together, and even though, I mean, some people go to the eye doctor and says, well, the acuity is fine. But, you know, we learned yesterday about the structure of the eye versus the function of the eye. And structures can be relatively intact, but the functioning might not be optimal. So I'm very suspicious when someone says, well, but the acuity is just fine. Well, do they have coloboma? Well, yeah, but they're small coloboma. Okay, well, that's good. But what else is there about the eye, and how well is the child using the eye? So functional vision assessment and functional hearing assessments are really important to see, you know, beyond just what the structure looks like, how is it really working for the child? So I think there are many more people who are functionally deafblind than we realize, which is why a lot of the state deafblind projects will just serve a kid with charge, at least initially, without any question of testing, because, you know, we're pretty sure there's a dual sensory impairment there. Also, yesterday, it was David explained the vestibular ocular reflex, which I think is one of these fascinating things. You know, I was in conversation with a young adult with charge on Facebook about some of issues, and he said, oh, that's why he works with pipe fitting or something like that. The pipe keeps moving on me, right? And I can't always find it. Well, that's because, you know, if you turn away for a moment, getting back to it is really hard, or if your head turns over, look at somebody else, you know, you've lost where it was. So just our vestibular organs in itself, and they're being messed up, influences your vision. So there's a lot of stuff going on there which is really, really significant for the potential development of behavioral issues. There's presumption out there that all behavior is learned. And that's really the basis, by the way, for ABA, or applied behavior analysis, is that all behavior is learned, and all behavior can be unlearned. And I don't think that's wrong exactly, that behavior is learned. But I think, more importantly, behavior is chosen. If people choose particular behaviors because they're going to satisfy some kind of need or some type of goal. That goes back to all behavior having a purpose. So why would a person choose a particular behavior? The answer to that tells me much more about the child and what's going on with the child than I wonder how they learned that, who reinforced it, right? So I want to give an example here. Okay. So very few of you would ever look at an iPad in this posture, right? I don't know if you saw this on Facebook recently, and I asked the mom if I could use it, and she said, absolutely. I just love it. But I'm pretty sure the mom did not teach him how to do this. Right? Oh, son, if you wanted to read the iPad, get on the couch on your head. That'll work great, and go through your legs, and it's perfect. No, this was chosen. Why in the world would a kid choose this behavior to read an iPad? Why would they want to look at an iPad either? That's another question. But here they are, lots of pressure to the head, which David talked about. In fact, there's lots of pressure to everything, the arms and the legs. Only the tush stick standing up there at the top is probably not getting a lot of pressure, which is nice. And also, with the colobomas, often our upper visual field is blocked, and so you actually have much straight look when you're upside down, straight ahead, as opposed to when you're standing up, when you have to put your head back to be able to see anything. So choosing it was a great solution to a problem this kid may be experiencing. Behavior being chosen makes so much sense for choosing the behavior to solve the situation that I find myself in. And if it works, they keep doing it over and over and over again. But also, if it doesn't work, sometimes our reaction to that behavior does create a dynamic of negative or positive reinforcement, and the kid may continue to do it just because of your reaction to it, which can be because you really liked it or because you try to get them not to do it. Why did the kids put beans in their ears? They did it because we said no, right? So that's the dynamic there. But then also it can be reinforced by the reaction of other people and becomes a habit. So some of these behaviors start out as at least a temporary solution to a problem, but then turn into just habit behavior, which they do over and over and over again, almost like a tic. No one knows really how to narrow down what's a tic and what's an obsession or compulsive behavior. And one psychiatrist now says it's just a mess. But I'll give you some examples here. So this is Jacob at Halloween, where he was dressed up as the man from Up, the old man from Up, and with his balloons. His caregiver Emily there was the person who came up with the costume idea. I consulted with a family whose kid was obsessed by balloons to the point that they would go to Walmart, and this Walmart had a balloon stand, right? And so I'm sure it started out great, and the kid said, "Oh, I want one of these balloons." Yay, he wants something. You buy him the balloon, and he's really happy. Next time you go back, he didn't just want the one balloon, he wanted all the balloons, right? And so they bought him all the balloons, right? And then every time they went to Walmart, he would have temper tantrum, meltdown, whatever, in front of the balloon stand, unless they bought him all the balloons. So you see, something started out with, I really kind of like a balloon, turns into a habit where I know what I do when I go to Walmart. I go over to the balloon stand, and I stand there until they buy me all the balloons, over and over and over again. I knew another kid with a charge who had 12 vacuum cleaners, right? Because really loved vacuum cleaners, and to avoid the meltdown and all that stuff, buy him another vacuum cleaner. So this is where things start becoming out of hand, because it was chosen, I choose a balloon, but it becomes a habit by our reaction to it. I don't know how many kids I've known with charge, 3 or 4 at least, that like to break all the TVs in the house over and over and over again. Not a nice one at all. Why would a kid choose, out of all the things they could break, the TV? And I can think of a couple reasons. One, get an amazing reaction from everybody else. And 2, that TV could be extremely annoying in terms of its sensory output. When I was a kid, they had long scenes in TV shows. Right now, they have to have the scene change every 15 or 30 seconds, something like that, because people are used to having things change all the time. So watch it, how often they change the scene. That's a lot of stimulation. So maybe that was a very convenient thing to choose, because I'm kind of pissed at it anyway, right? The reaction, of course, that the child gets from that can be a part of reinforcing that behavior so it repeats itself too. So we got to be very careful in terms of how we respond to the broken TV, and I'll come back to that, but it's not a nice one. The feces smearing. But Jacob has very, very few, or any, I would call serious behavioral issues. There are two potential reasons for that. One is that his behavior I choose to ignore, which is quite possible. No, he doesn't. He's just fine. Or the second reason is the first time in history that having parents who are both psychologists was useful. But the feces smearing was not fun, right? One thing, it stinks. But he doesn't have a sense of smell, so that wouldn't bother him. And you already know he likes to paint himself, right? So, it seems like a reasonable thing to do. The stuff's coming out behind you, and boy, he's quick. He was so quick. Oh my gosh, it was, suddenly the smell hits before you even notice that, oh, what has he done? We did a lot of things to deal with it. One is to think about what pleasure is he getting from it. And that's why we went to finger paints and Play-Doh and shaving cream and stuff that he could play with, hoping to satisfy some of that, if he's choosing it because he kind of likes the different kinds of textures and sensations. Of course, we worked very hard on scheduling bodies so that he would become as scheduled as he possibly could be. And also, initially you clean him up. You have to wipe down the house too, but you clean him up and then put him in the bathtub. Well, you all know how our kids feel about baths. He would be in the bathtub all day long if you let him. He loves the bath. So we were also reinforcing the behavior that he'd chosen to do. So we switched to showers, which he hates, right? So if you're doing it because you want a bath afterwards, this is not working anymore. And he hasn't done it for a number of years, I think. Thank goodness. So something worked. But also we tried very hard to make sure that we weren't doing something which would encourage the behavior to continue. And I think that's important. Button pulling, I don't know if the kids pull their gastrostomy button out when they're upset, or their trach. Those are both bad things for the kids to do. And I suspect they know it. I also suspect that it begins, this is really uncomfortable. You get granulation tissue around it, all sorts of stuff. I just want this thing out. And they don't always know that that's not something you really should do. And, well, I've been breathing fine now. Let me take this thing out because it's annoying around my neck. And then how do we react? Oh my gosh, the panic button. I got that tube back in the stomach within, I don't know, we heard 20 minutes. We never tested it to see how long it took. Except we finally removed it permanently against medical advice. Because they kept saying, no, let's keep it in. No, we're taking it out. And then we said, oh, they said, where's his button? It fell out and we didn't notice. So I think we have to be very careful with the button pulling, whichever button it is, to monitor our reaction to it. The more calm you can stay, the less likely it's going to become a habit, because it's not working only because I get rid of this thing, but I also get this amazing reaction from other people, which is really kind of fun. Of course, staying calm during those situations is not easy. It's also distraction can help. Sometimes you see, oh, they're about to pull it. Let's go do this. Jacob, there are a few times he tested headbanging, and I would just say, no, let's go do over here. And he never got into it. I don't know if that was the reason, but I was really glad. I did not want to deal with headbanging. Thank you very much. Here's a thought I had during the Orlando conference. I actually wrote it down. It may be that our efforts to get children to function normally are precisely what leads them to developing more extreme dysfunctional behavior. We want our kids to act in normal ways, whatever that is. I mean, my suggestion is to embrace weirdness, but when we're trying to get them to stop doing it, we're into problems. I'd written down some notes, and I wrote down sit up. I kept thinking, why am I supposed to sit up? Oh no, I remember, it's an example for right here. How many of our kids will sit like this, with their arm down? And David explained that yesterday. It's because their head is much more stable when it's being supported. How much work we have to do just to keep our head stable on our shoulders anyway? all those neck muscles and shoulder muscles. And and without the vestibular stuff, it's really tough because the vestibular-ocular reflex that you got going on. So being able to hold the head, really, really helpful. But that's not normal. And I hear teachers too. David mentioned the thing about lazy, the L word. That kid's so lazy, they can't keep their head up. No, the kid is being stable. The kid's paying more attention to you with their head being supported on their arm or their hand than if they're trying to hold their head up when they're spending all their energy just trying to keep their head up. So in trying to make the kid normal, we're telling the kid to stop doing something which is working for them. They chose it because it's working for them. And then we get into a power struggle, and then the kid's behavior gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So I really mean it. We need to embrace weirdness. I mean, this is weirdness. I asked one time on Facebook, anybody have any photos of the kid hanging upside down? Now this is just as I had 85 the next day. Yeah, I could go back and pull them out. I got a whole file on my computer of hanging upside down. So clearly this works. The girl up in the upper left, I consulted with that family, and I went out. I talked to this one I talked on the phone. I was talking to the superintendent and the special ed director and the teacher and principal and everybody. Jessica wanted to hang upside down. In our school, children do not hang upside down, right? So what happens when we try to correct her weird behavior and not let her hang upside down? She became aggressive. She hit people. She scratched people. They isolated her. She was in a classroom which was too young for her age, hidden behind a partition by herself because they couldn't control her behaviors because she wanted to hang upside down, among other things. She didn't like being in her seat all the time either, and she'd get out of her seat, and they'd say, no, you have to sit in your seat. She'd try to get out. No, you have to sit in your seat. Try to get out. And then she'd have a meltdown, and she'd hit somebody and scratch somebody. And I said, why don't we teach her a way to say, I need to get out of my seat, please? Right? It could be a sign, it could be a picture, but some way that she could say, I need to get out of my seat. And then, that we bypass all this temper stuff. And they said, yeah, but then she'd be manipulating us. And I said, well, no, actually, she'd be using communication, which is much more important than seat time, right? But normal kids don't have to do that, right? Normal kids will stay in their seat. Nah, not really, but they're supposed to. I wish my students would do it. No, When I get a question about behavior, and I get a lot of, I'll probably average an email a week, and feel free to email me. I love it because I feel like I got friends, and and I learn a lot, right? Because you guys teach me so much from your experiences. My first reaction, though, of course, when someone says, my kid's doing this and this and this, and I go, I have no idea, right? Because I really don't. And I have to sit back and think, then I think, what in the world could I possibly say which would be at all helpful? But then roll up my sleeves and say, okay, must place myself in this child's position and see what might be happening. Because again, if I understand the purpose, maybe the behavior will make sense. So I want to show you a little clip of some behavior. And this will work. I know it'll work. Yeah. You promised me it would work. Do I need to have the... Bring me my flash drive. Oh, shoot. Just in case. It was working up here.
No, it's all right. Hold on, I can get this back.
Yeah, no problem.
Is this the only video you have?
No, I got one other. There, now it's looking good. That's looking good here. It's not on the...
Where's your other video? You just set these to go automatically.
It's at the end. Almost the end right there. Yeah.
I'm going to set these to go automatically too. So when
Okay.
you click on the slide,
All right.
it's going to play.
Fine.
We'll go back to your other slide.
Yep.
So go here, and then now when you go to the next one, it'll play.
All right.
And then audio's on.
I'm going to show you that one more time. By the way, the people doing the technical stuff here, they've been amazing. They really have. I think they deserve a... Well, you can hear it. This is my student Bellie's favorite child. All right. One of the things that I've learned is we always must check pain first. Pain is a huge factor in kids with charge. I mean, and the role of pain in behavior generally is not well understood. There's a book out about it from a couple of years ago. There's some research taking place, but it's really primitive at this point in time. But we know that pain influences behavior. I mean, how do you behave when you're in pain, right? Do you whine? Do you moan? Do you go isolate yourself? Do you tough it out? Different kinds of things that we do. Children with charge do experience lots of pain. I don't have to list any of that for you because you all know what it is. Assessing pain, though, can be really difficult, particularly if the kids are non-vocal, or as I think it was Donna indicated, we're pretty sure that the kids experience pain somewhat differently. I don't think it's because they have a high pain threshold, though. I think to think that they have a high pain threshold is dangerous, because then we don't treat pain and we ignore pain because, well, they can tolerate lots of pain. They have a high pain tolerance. I mean, some of you are, no, most of you are pretty young, but as we get older, we develop lots of little pains, right? And we just ignore them, right? I mean, that's the last time you got a paper cut, and after you said some dirty word, you know, you just went on with your life, right? Ignoring the fact you had a paper cut. That's because we tolerate it. And I think our kids with charge are so used to experiencing pain, they tolerate it a long time, and then suddenly something goes over the edge and they can't tolerate it any longer. It probably surprises them as much as it surprises us when they then have a huge behavioral reaction. So we have to, and I know you take the kid to the doctor says, oh, everything looks fine to me. I know there's something wrong. Somebody posted on Facebook last night about that issue with her son. It's, you know, that's why we need places like the Charge Clinic here in Cincinnati, you know, because we need people who know that parents have some knowledge and are willing to go the extra mile to identify what's going on with our kid, and they will do that here. So it's a little plug for this place. But I think this place is amazing. I really do. The second thing I think about, and this is lots influenced by David, but David and I forget sometimes who taught who what. So but I think this is when he taught me. But does the behavior seem to help the person function? You know, for all of us, functioning in this world isn't necessarily easy, so what do you do to help yourself function? We had that really nice presentation yesterday about the mindfulness and self-care to help us function. How to move towards the goals that we have in life. What behaviors do we choose to get ourselves there? Excuse me. And how to self-regulate. I love this particular picture, too. I was looking for one for the article we had that came out last year in the issue of the Donna helped edit in the American Journal of Medical Genetics. And they wanted a photograph to illustrate the hanging upside down. So again, post to the web, who's got a picture? And this one won, because it's lovely, isn't it? I mean, she's got it down. This is the way to relax if you've got a kid with you have Charge syndrome. You know, you can do all your breathing and mindfulness stuff, but this works. So that's one thing I ask myself: does the behavior help to seem to help the person function? And why would they have chosen that behavior over all the other kinds of behaviors they might have chosen? But again, thinking of it as choosing really, really helps me to imagine myself in that position and why I would be doing that, which helps us get more towards possible interventions. I also want to know when the behavior started. If the behavior is long-standing, it's going to be really hard to change. Dan mentioned that with things like kids been doing this for 14 years. It's going to be really, really hard to change because it's moved beyond choosing and it's become something that's become habit reinforced, and so they're doing it over and over and over again because it's just something that they do. So it's going to require a lot of unique strategies and very intensive care, and frequently actually inpatient, to be able to deal with the medications the kid might be on, because you need to kind of wean a person off of those medications, because usually the intelligence which was utilized to decide what medications to give a kid sometimes not there. It's like, talked to somebody in Orlando, I think it was, and kid was on 12 different psychotropics, right? But each one was added because something else wasn't working, and so I said, oh, it must be a basket case. It was just kind of zombie-like, and I said, no, wild, uncontrollable. And I talked to some people who had known this kid several years before and said she was very calm, cooperative, but they decided the meds was the solution to something. So it really takes intense work for a long-term behavior. If the behavior is relatively new, I want to know, when did it start? Does something change or happen? Is it increasing or decreasing? Really important kinds of things. If it's getting worse, something's going on with this kid which is getting worse, probably. If it's getting better, well, let's wait it out. But really I'm interested in what changed. Was there a change in routine, or change in family, school, home, people, setting? Interesting how many times it's a new kid in the classroom. I've heard that one a lot. I said, well, that's interesting. There was a parent that was consulting with me on email, and the behavior was, I can't remember exactly the behavior. No, I don't remember at all what the behavior was. But I asked, how long has it been going on? I said, about 3 months. I said, what happened 3 months ago? Nothing. I said, And they said, well, wait a minute. No, all we did, we went on vacation. I said, oh, did she enjoy her vacation? And the mom said, no, it was hell for her. All right, I think we got a clue now. I don't know what it was about the vacation, but something was occurring around vacation so it was hell for her, and I think this behavior is an outgrowth of that. It doesn't tell me everything about it at this point in time, but it gives me a hint. So anytime a new behavior occurs, sometimes it's just the kid got bored with the old one and they've adopted a new one. I know, but it's interesting to ask oneself, what has changed? What is going on? Is there some new event? There's one girl in Australia that was developing some new behaviors. This is a very high-functioning kid. And the mother was all concerned and was emailing me and said, well, what's going on? Well, her dad developed severe dementia and is going to have to go into a home. Could that be it? Well, that probably is it. I didn't think it was bothering her so much, right? Our kids are very sensitive to changes and what's going on in the family, even though they seem like they might not. Very often they are. This one confuses people sometimes. What's being said by the behavior? I know I've asked people, if your kid could put their behavior into words, what would they be saying? And they say, I don't know what you're talking about. So this is kind of a made-up case. I actually adopted it from an article someplace. If you ever want to see the article, I can find it again. But I made it up in terms of Justin's a 9-year-old with Charge, who sometimes when he sees somebody, he hits them. All right, just kind of out of the blue, hits them. So what might Justin be saying? Well, I hate surprises, therefore, so that person was suddenly there, I was surprised, and so I hit them. Or I don't like being touched, and I was afraid that person was going to touch me, and so I hit them. Or I wanted to acknowledge your presence. There's old Dick Van Dyke episode in which he was this old friend of his, and they go, stretch. My sister and I did that for years, stretch. Never, I'm sorry, I was free associating. I'll bring myself back. I like you very much, therefore whammo. I did that to my sister, actually. I came home from school every day in 7th grade and hit her. She hung up a pillow from a rope and asked me to hit that instead. It never squealed back. It's much better to hit her. I need more warning before you approach me. I've been touched too many times. I can't tolerate it anymore. I'm afraid you're going to touch me. I was telling you I'm ready for work. I don't get that one at all, but I'm not Justin, so, Or I was asking you to come back later. Probably worked really well. But if you can put the behavior in some kind of words like that, it begins to disclose some of the purpose of the behavior. And you can kind of test it out by every time the behavior occurs. Are they telling me at the same time, I'm getting an ear infection, Dad, right? So what's it telling me here? I wanted to say a little bit about consequences. And the cartoon says, how am I supposed to think about consequences before they happen? Right? Well, that's the ideal situation with consequences, is we do talk about them before they happen. But natural consequences are the best consequences. That's what happens if you do nothing. And really, very often, that's the most helpful thing you can do, is nothing. Right? Because the more you press, but it's really hard for parents sometimes. So what's the natural consequence if your kid doesn't eat for a meal? Well, they have to eat. Now, with charge, it's different because they pretty much do have to eat. Other kids, actually, if they missed a meal, they would live. But it's really hard for us to follow through with that natural consequence. One that worked really well for me was socks. I love socks, but I didn't care if they matched or not. So I had unmatched socks for years, despite my mother's criticizing me over and over again. Tim, get socks that match. Yeah. But one day I was in the 6th grade class, sitting nicely at my desk. Teacher walks by and says, Timmy, your socks don't match. And everybody laughed. My socks have matched every day since then. Right? So think about the natural consequence. Certain natural consequences we can't allow. I mean, a kid wants to run out of the street. Good luck with the consequence. Right? No, we don't go there. So that's why we have logical consequences. And logical consequences are somehow the consequence fits the behavior, so it kind of makes a certain amount of sense. It's like parents who do this, you're grounded for a year. I mean, it's unlikely to be related to the offense anyway, and they're never going to follow through, so it's really even stupid to go there. Or, you miss curfew, so we're taking away your phone. Actually, we probably want you to call if you're going to miss curfew, so having your phone's pretty useful. So those things don't make any kinds of sense. But if I'm smashing TVs, one of the consequences is you don't have access to a TV. We're going to move it to a room that you just don't have ability to go into. And you can have the conversation ahead of time. Dear, I know you love to smash TVs. Very hard to do with our kids, I get that, but theoretically. So if you decide to smash the TV, we're just going to have to remove the TV. Now, ideally from your home entirely, but very few of us could handle that. And I have to watch my shows, right? Orange is the New Black just started, right? So, we got to have that. But something that's somewhat logical and reasonable in terms of what the person did. And if you have any behaviors you want to throw at me at some point, I'm happy to try to imagine logical consequences. It's kind of a fun exercise to think through what makes sense. I mean, when my kids, there were lots of ways that we worked it. Sometimes kind of natural, kind of logical, like doing laundry. If you don't do laundry, what's going to happen? Well, I guess we'll wear dirty clothes. You got it. My kids were great about doing laundry. If you don't get up with your alarm in the morning, what's going to happen? I might be late to school. Good luck with that one, right? So I didn't want it on me. I wanted that on them. Anxiety. My student Shanti is doing a project on anxiety. If you want to be a part of that study, sign up for a sheet out there. I'll post it on Facebook as well, but sometimes that doesn't get enough people to sign up for research, it turns out, but I know you all want to be a part of it, so sign up. I'll make sure you get it. And a lot of the anxiety I think that we experience is just the not knowing. One of the things I learned from years ago from my wife, who's much smarter than I am and teaches me a lot of things, was, Jacob doesn't always know. We go into his room and get him and take him out and stick him in the car. What's going on? When you go out and get into your car, you have a pretty good idea where you're going. But oftentimes, kids who are deaf-blind, multisensory impaired, they don't have a clue what's happening. Something's happening, right? I was having a nice time resting on my bed, playing, or obsessing with my toy, and suddenly you're pulling me away from that. Why? And that not only creates some upset about why you're disturbing me, but also anxiety about what's going to happen. And you get that, do you have that thing with your kid? Are we going to Kmart? Are we going to Kmart? Are we going to Kmart over and over and over again while you're driving to Kmart? And you're saying, bloody hell, I am going to Kmart. Come on, shut up about it. Are we going to Kmart? Right. But sometimes it's related to the anxiety that they've developed around, do things really happen? I remember one parent was taking the kid to the doctor, but the doctor's office had moved farther down the road and was passing by the office, and the kid started hitting her. She's driving, hitting her back, right? Had a huge meltdown in the car because you're supposed to be over here. They don't know. So changes in routine, all sorts of things like that cause anxiety. One way to increase predictability is a calendar. That's not for the first episode of Orange is the New Black. That is actually because I'm talking here today. But it's nice to have the planning ahead of time so I have the comfort of knowing when this thing is going to happen. I can give myself time to prepare, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of different kinds of calendar systems, and I'm not going to go into them because deaf-blind projects are wonderful resources on calendar systems. It's an amazingly brilliant strategy that people don't always do very well. So I do encourage you, even if you already have a calendar system, to double check with somebody like from the Deaf-Blind Project to see if you got all the nuances of it, because it's relatively complicated but extremely brilliant and reduces anxiety. Meltdown versus tantrum. I love this. I found it somewhere on the internet. A lot of our kids have both, but the tantrums when they're looking for a reaction, they're communicating what they need or want. They're aware of their own safety issues. They're unlikely to hurt themselves, even if they flop on the floor or fall down. They're fine. They're in control of their behavior ultimately, and they're able to calm themselves down when the situation is resolved and you bought them all the balloons. A meltdown is none of those things. I remember watching a girl in California. She was in the gymnasium at the school working on some kind of weight thing. Music blaring, kids running by, laughing, shouting. And I just watched the meltdown. You could just see something came over her face. And then she completely lost behavioral control. And it took 3 people to get her back to her classroom. I wasn't sure it needed all 3, but that was their strategy. But that wasn't a temper tantrum. It wasn't because she wanted something, even though they made her sit down and talk about what happened and all this stuff, which I did. She melted down because there was way too much stimulation for her at that moment. So it's interesting to ask yourself sometimes, is this an issue of they just want something so they're tantruming, or they've lost behavioral control, probably due to sensory systems that are malfunctioning. I like to know the behavior occurs in multiple settings. You hear this. My kid, they say at school that my kid does this. My kid never does that at home. Or, parents complain about this behavior all the time, but we don't see that at school. Either one. It's interesting, assuming they're both reporting correctly, kids do discriminate between situations. And so then I ask myself, what's going on at home or what's going on at school that might be causing that behavior? And it really helps to narrow it down a lot to know what the setting is that it occurs in. Understanding the setting in which the behavior occurs, and do a whole talk on this, and David's done it, but think about the people who are in your child's life and in their environment, and how overwhelming those people might be, how supportive those people might be, how useful the people are for your child, the kind of space that you have for the kids. And thank you. I got 10 minutes, and I'm going to use every one of them. Actually, I might finish early. But what the kind of environment, right? There are certain rooms which are facilitative of kids. This girl over here has done brilliantly the whole time. This is evidently a great environment for her. If it were Jacob, he'd be over in a corner. If he could find a floor vent, That'd be just perfect because he could rub his hand against it. But I know that when Jacob's in a really busy environment, he tends to withdraw. When it's kind of a calm environment, that's when he gets much more active, right? But the space, how it's arranged, what you're going to trip over, those kinds of things are important. And then the way we use time. Time is really important to us because we're important people. For our kids with charge, time is much more nebulous. Sometimes, for all of us it does, but sometimes it can really drag when nothing's happening. And sometimes I'm being interrupted way too often. Teaching the concept of time, teaching the concept of waiting, helping the kids to manage the time environment, also very, very helpful in terms of dealing with behaviors. I also like to think about managing the environment in terms of preventing behavior problems. So consider how you could make the environment of your child safe and secure to enable their optimal development and to avoid challenging behaviors. So is the environment familiar? We're all happier in familiar environments, right? I mean, when you go home, that's one of the comforts of being at home. It's familiar. You know, when you go to some new place and you're trying to sort this out, it's much more unsettling. So how can we create environments for our kids where they feel safe and secure and so comfortable in that environment? Environments that are regular are much better for our kids than environments that are chaotic. I know that there's different degrees of self-regulation in all of us. Some people are highly regulated, very routinized, and some people enjoy a very chaotic life when it changes constantly. I'm more of the rigid, like the things to be the certain way kind of guy. My wife, not so much. And that's why, in raising Jacob, I ended up doing the regular daily care because I could be very consistent. I could feed him every 2 hours. I could remember to do that, as opposed to, honey, did you feed Jacob? Oh, no, I forgot. Could you do it? Sure. And after a while, I stopped asking because it just made more sense for me to do it. But our kids do thrive with the regularities. So if you are a less well-regulated person, change. Really, having some regularity is I think, is really cool. Cool people are not spontaneous, It's like Then a responsive environment. A responsive environment's one which knows how to appropriately respond to the events that take place during the course of the day. And that's really hard with your kid with charge. It's hard when you have a kid with charge and a bunch of other kids. At one time, I had 3 kids in pull-ups, including Jacob. And I honestly spent all day long just changing people and putting them on the potty. That's all I did. Like, okay, who's next, right? And I just went through them, right? But being responsive, and that's really hard because I remember one of the first things I learned about deafblindness, there was a consultant about that before we had the project, who said, you don't know when in the 24-hour period that kid's going to be available. And so being alert to when they are available so that you can respond and be there for them is really important. We use that logic to get him into early childhood school-based program earlier than they took kids, because this person said, no, it's so important for him to be in an educational environment longer during the day because you don't know when he's going to be available for some kind of interaction. And then creating an environment that meets the basic needs. And I wrote this in terms of the basic needs of the child, but I do think it's incredibly important that you be alert to your own basic needs. And that was the presentation yesterday, so I won't belabor that, but if you're not taking care of yourself, you're useless to your kid. Remember, it's a communication relationship. Our response to behavior is part of a communication event. Their behavior is communicating to us. The way we respond communicates back to them. So think about, as you choose your response, what am I communicating to my child in this relationship? Think about what it is you want to say, keeping in mind the goal of communication. Think about how you are responding. That's hard to do in the heat of the moment and in the panic that sets in when our kid does something new, which happens a lot. But it's really important if you want to maintain that relationship and not create the monster behavior. One other little behavior here. Okay, not a really cool behavior, but one you may have seen. What do you think? How many of you think that pain might be involved? Yeah, it turned out this was several years later when they identified where the source of the gastrointestinal pain was. But Eddie did a lot of hitting himself. And it's still, because it's kind of a habit now, he still tends to hit himself, even though the pain, I think, is being much better managed now. So always, 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 please think of pain first. And recognize that there's meaning to this behavior. It has a purpose. If I hit myself, I'm masking some pain that may be coming somewhere else. And I'm also expressing my degree of upset. So it's telling me something really important. Scaring the heck out of the parents, right? What do I do? And where do they go for help? And so often the doctors say, ooh, I don't know. It's a syndrome, right? Just weird behavior, probably autistic, right? Which doesn't get us any help. There are no easy answers to this. Every child's unique. Every circumstance is unique. It can be hard to find experience about charge in the medical educational communities. We know this. Really difficult to find that expertise. You all are the experts and have to accept that. Behavioral issues are predictable but not inevitable. Right? I think there's lots of reasons why our kids with charge would develop behavioral issues, but it is not inevitable. Hopefully some of these ideas will help you think through situations that may help you get a better handle on why my child might be behaving this way, because it's the why that leads to what to do about it. We can't really know what to do about it if we don't understand the circumstances. This is a recent picture of my lab. In the bottom row, 3 of those people are here. The lab's a mixture of doctoral students and undergraduate students, very carefully chosen. There's one undergraduate student here, and I recruited her pretty heavily. I've actually recruited all of them pretty heavily. It just this is what keeps me going, is having this group of students, because they are so excited, so enthusiastic. They actually care about charge syndrome. They care about the kids. They've developed a passion for it. But then, what's not to be passionate about? This is charge syndrome. It's wonderful. Sometimes. Thank you very much.